Nog steeds vuurt Hamas dagelijks raketten af op Israël. Maar in de media gaat het bijna alleen over de bombardementen die Israël uitvoert op Gaza. De oorlog in Israël heeft ook flinke gevolgen voor de Joodse mensen in Nederland. Yaron Wax van de Israëlische ambassade in Nederland praat over het verloop van de oorlog, de Israëlische gijzelaars en het antisemitisme in Nederland. Welkom bij Uitgelicht. Goedenavond. Bijna 3 weken na de afgrijselijke aanslagen van Hamas in het zuiden van Israël lijkt de wereld deze aanleiding vergeten te zijn. In plaats daarvan klinkt steeds meer anti-Israël retoriek. Moeten Joodse organisaties en scholen voor eigen veiligheid de deuren sluiten en worden evenementen afgelast. Bij ons in de studio Yaron Wax. Hij is adjunct ambassadeur van Israël in Nederland. Good evening, Mr. Wax.
Good evening.
And welcome to our show.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah. To start with the actual situation, day 19 of the war against Hamas, how do you see the war developing?
Well, I think, as you said, we're almost 3 weeks into this forced war with Hamas.
Yeah.
It was forced upon us on the 7th of October with the atrocities and the massacre that was perpetrated by Hamas.
A dark day in the history of Israel already.
A terrible day, I think, in the history of Israel, but I think also in the history of the entire world. Mm-hmm. This is not only an issue for Israel. We've seen the atrocities, Hamas and ISIS-like attacks, and it's not only a war of Israel. We've seen comments by other leaders around the world, including President Macron. This is something that I think the global community needs to unite against.
Yeah.
But going back to what happened almost 3 weeks ago in the history of the Middle East and the conflicts in our region, of course 3 weeks is a long time. But in Israel, we're only just starting to come to terms with what happened. And every day we're seeing new footage, new videos, new accounts of what happened on that day. So we're really just starting to come to terms with it, and we're really just starting to come to our mission, which is to destroy Hamas, to remove its military capabilities.
Yeah, we're going to speak about that. But is Hamas still attacking Israel as we speak?
As we speak, rocket fire is still coming from Hamas. Mm-hmm. We still see on a daily basis attempts to infiltrate the territory of Israel through the sea and other places. And if we look back at what happened, I mean, you look at some of the images that come out and you try to understand, what comes behind this. Yeah. And we've seen some of the footage and some of the examples. For example, on one of the terrorists, we found this note that was on his body that we looked into afterwards. Mm-hmm. And what this basically says is, and this is a message to the terrorists, know that this enemy of yours is a disease that has no cure other than the beheading and extracting the hearts and livers. And this is what the terrorists were ordered to do when they came in. Yeah. And if we look at the figures now, there are, at the moment, over 1,400 Israelis that were murdered that day. And just for you to understand the scale of what happened, of these 1,400, still approximately 300 of the bodies are yet to be identified. Now, they're yet to be identified because of the level of what happened. Yeah. These are houses that were put alight and people that were burned alive. And the families of the people that were murdered, they don't have an identification yet. No. So that's the scale of what
it was terrible what happened to the people in that part of your country. There are also still some Israeli citizens captured by Hamas. How is their situation?
So that's, I think, the unfortunate part. And when we talk about the humanitarian situation, the first thing that needs to be dealt with are the hostages that are being kept captive in the Gaza Strip. At the moment, it's approximately 222 people. Yeah. We have no idea what their situation is, and that is because the Red Cross are not provided access. Yeah. Some of these hostages are in a very bad health situation, and that is why we demand, first of all, immediate access for the Red Cross, and immediate and release of all the hostages.
Yeah, you don't have intelligence of your own IDF who is acting there?
We have some indications,
Yeah.
and in initial days, and it's still happening, we have different ways to try and get more information about what happened. However, in the complexity of the situation, these hostages are being held, most of them, in underground tunnels, which is where the Hamas keep their military capabilities, and it's very difficult to get information.
So it's very hard for you, for your army, to start a ground war.
There are different
as long as the hostages are there.
There are different calculations behind our plans for a ground offensive, and that's something that we take into account, everything on the ground. One of those issues, of course, is the hostages. Yeah. However, we will do what it takes to destroy Hamas capabilities and depose their regime. And of course, we want to achieve the release of all the hostages. And we're working on that on all channels. Yeah,
one of the hostages has a Dutch nationality, Mr. Ofir Engel. A few weeks ago, he was just an Israeli, but he got the Dutch citizenship. How do you act with him? Do you support him here from the Netherlands?
Well, I think first of all, of course, we look at all the hostages and we demand the release of everyone. Ofir Engel is one of them, and we hope for his release. We've seen the support of the Dutch government. Prime Minister Rutte visited Israel a few days ago and met with the family of Ofir Engel. And I know that the Dutch government are also active, speaking to other regional leaders to try and support the release, first of all, of all hostages, but of course also looking particularly at the case of Ofir Engel.
Does it help that he has a Dutch nationality?
Listen, I have to say, as far as we're concerned, we look at all hostages. We don't make any differentiation between the nationality they have, and we want the release for all. Of course, different countries, if they have nationals involved, they have their own priorities as well.
Yeah. Let's look at the situation now. The ground offensive is still not there, although your Prime Minister has said, we're going to act in Gaza. When do you think it starts?
I think every day we're evaluating the situation. We see different operations that happen on the ground, including last night there was a limited incursion into the Gaza Strip. I think we'll make the right calculations when we decide to go in. The target is to depose Hamas and to remove its capabilities. And therefore, I foresee that there will be a ground incursion, but the timing, we'll decide when that's the right time.
Your Prime Minister said we want to destroy Hamas, and it must never happen again, what was on October 7th.
I think what we've understood from the tragedy that happened a few weeks ago, is that we cannot live anymore with this situation. We cannot live with a situation where a massacre like this can happen again. Hamas ideas about the destruction of Israel is nothing new. This is something they've stated for years, and they want to destroy Israel and to kill Jews all over the world. What we have seen on October 7th is what happens when they have the opportunity. And therefore, for us civilians to be free, to be able to live, we need to take care of this. And that is the objective, and that is what we are going to do. And it's going to take time, and we need support for that, because this is a defensive war, and this is something that we need to achieve. And like I said, it's not only in the interest of Israel, it's in the interest of the whole international community. And this is not also about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's about a war against the Hamas terrorist organization. And while Hamas is in leadership of the Gaza Strip, there cannot be any solution.
But on the other hand, there are also civilians in the Gaza Strip, innocent civilians, women, children, elder people. And if you start a war, there will be civilian killings.
I think, as you said, in wars, unfortunately, there are also casualties in the civilian population. From our perspective, first of all, we are targeting only Hamas operatives. That doesn't mean there can't be civilian casualties, unfortunately. However, one of the reasons for the high amount of casualties is because Hamas keep their citizens as shields for their operations. And I'll give you an example. From our perspective, if you look inside Israel, we've evacuated approximately 150,000 of our citizens surrounding the Gaza Strip, and also in the north of Israel, on the borders with Lebanon, where we faced over the past few weeks increasing attacks from Hezbollah, which we're taking care of in a measured manner for now. However, we'll know how to deal with Hezbollah if they continue these attacks. But that's just the example of what we do, because we want to remove our civilians from harm's way.
Yeah, and you say they can do it also.
So in the Gaza Strip, we have advised and we have requested civilians in the northern part of the Gaza Strip to go down south. And the reason we've done that is because we are going to increase our operations in the northern part, targeting Hamas, and it will help the civilians there to move south.
Okay, but the world is speaking about a humanitarian corridor.
Yes.
Is that the solution?
So I think over the past week we've seen increased humanitarian aid go into the Gaza Strip, which we have agreed to, going in through the Rafah crossing. Now this is food, water and medicine, and we have conditioned this on the fact that it goes to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip, and it goes to the southern part of the Gaza Strip, and that this doesn't go to Hamas. If we see that this aid does go to Hamas, we'll take care of that. There's a mechanism that's currently in place where the food and aid that comes in is monitored by Israel, the US and Egypt. And we believe that this will continue to come in as long as it's reaching its target. Now, on the other hand, Hamas are deliberately avoiding this aid coming in. And we talk about other issues. There are reports that come out all the time about the humanitarian situation, the lack of fuel, hospitals there. And at the same time, we see depots of fuel that are being held by Hamas and not released to the civilian population. Why? Because they want to keep these resources for their military operation. And I think every report that comes out of the Gaza Strip and out of the Hamas information has to be scrutinized at every level, because the information that comes out of there is not correct. And you need to look at other reliable sources. It's not saying that there isn't a difficult situation in the Gaza Strip. We understand there is. However, we're currently in a war. And in a war, unfortunately, there are only losers.
That's for sure. Let's go to the Netherlands, to our situation. Because the first days of the war, there was a pro-Israel sentiment. But it's turning around. It's now anti-Israel. How do you explain that?
I mean, first of all, I'd like to say to begin with that we're very appreciative of the support and the strong support of the Dutch government, especially from Prime Minister Rutte, who's been very clear on condemnation of Hamas and Israel's right to defend its citizens and attack Hamas in return.
But he also went to Mr. Abbas.
He also went to Mr. Abbas.
Palestinian leader.
He also went to Mr. Abbas. What I can say on that is I think one of the big problems from this conflict is the lack of condemnation, clear condemnation from the Palestinian leadership. Now, we've heard different reports that within meetings, Abbas has condemned what happened. Day publicly, I have not seen any direct statement. I've seen the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, who refused to condemn it a few times in an interview just a day ago. A clear condemnation by the Palestinian Authority of the Hamas atrocities, I think, should come out, and I think it's awful that hasn't been the place.
Okay, let's
the sentiment here in the Netherlands.
To the Dutch situation, because schools are being closed, events are cancelled.
I think it needs to be clear that what's happening now is a war between Israel and Hamas. And to relate this directly only to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is wrong. We see the sentiment. I think in some of the demonstrations we've seen also support for Hamas, Hamas flags, and these things need to be called out. We also see cries, both in demonstrations and awfully also in the Dutch parliament, cries like "from the river to the sea," which are cries that are directly calling for the destruction of the state of Israel, the only Jewish state in the world. And I think all these things fuel also public opinion.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems also that leads to some of these rallies we see outside is also the way the media covers this conflict and the way the media sometimes does not check the facts. And a good example of that is what happened last week with the tragic bombing of the hospital area.
But are the Israeli people here in the Netherlands, the Jewish people, are they in fear?
They are in fear. And I think that's also a tragic thing.
Yeah.
People here, and we know what happened here many years ago during the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And people, yes, they are in fear.
Yeah.
They're in fear because things are directed also to the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And we've had reports of people that want to take the mezuzot off their doors.
Yeah.
You know, a situation like this, I think, is terrible.
Yeah, and in 2 weeks there is the 85th commemoration of the Kristallnacht. Yeah, have we as society learned something in the past 85 years?
From what we've seen in the past couple of weeks, I say that probably not enough. I think people need to be, you know, clearer with their direction here, clearer with the reporting, and to make sure that these things are not connecting and that people understand that these things should not be allowed.
Yeah. Are you afraid that something might happen again?
I think what we're trying to do is make sure that these things don't happen.
Yeah.
Now it's in our region, but it could happen anywhere. We've seen across Europe that there have been attacks on Jewish synagogues and other buildings. I very much hope that this doesn't happen here in the Netherlands, but I think we need to be very careful of that and be cautious, and all the authorities here need to look into that.
Yeah. To wrap up, you started our conversation with it's not a war against Israel, but a war against the world. Do you feel enough support from the world leaders?
I think generally we've had very, very strong support from the world leaders, but this needs to continue. There are growing calls now we see from some elements for a ceasefire. A ceasefire basically means that we have been attacked and then we are not allowed to defend ourselves. We are not allowed to resolve the problem. And while Hamas is still there in leadership, it means that we will continue with this threat and that we can have this type of atrocity happen again.
Yeah.
So I think people need to understand that we need to have time to deal with this, and we need the support of the international community.
Yeah, you need time, you say.
Yes.
Days, weeks, months?
It's very difficult to predict, but certainly it's more than days.
More than days, yeah. And do you feel that Israel in this conflict is more and more getting in a lone position?
I think, again, it comes back, unfortunately, sometimes to the media.
Yeah.
And you need to understand that these are not two equal sides. This is a terrorist organization that's attacking a civilian population compared to a sovereign, democratic state that is defending itself. And every source of information needs to scrutinize in that way, and people need to be fair.
Yeah.
The reporting that happened last week, and this connects to the fear also of the Jewish community here and other communities, the reports that came out on the hospital led to immediate mass demonstrations across the world, but also particularly here in the Netherlands within less than an hour. Yeah. And these type of things need to be stopped. Okay. People need to look at sources that come out of credible places, Israel and others from the international community, and not reports that come out of Hamas, including the number of casualties that they report on a daily basis. The hospital, for example, they immediately came out and reported that there were 500 casualties. Yeah. And now looking back, it seems that it's less than 100.
Okay. We're going to see how it's developing, this war between Israel and Hamas. Thank you for this interview, Mr. Yaron Wax, Vice Ambassador of the Israeli Embassy here in the Netherlands.
Thank you for having me.
Want dit was Uitgelicht voor vandaag. Morgen beleven we welzijn. Dan zijn we er weer met een nieuwe Uitgelicht. Fijne avond. Graag tot dan. Dag.